Hi there, this is Kristoffer from Spare, and this is Spare's first micro webinar. It's a concise format for sharing our most important thoughts with you. In this episode, we'll explore how COVID-19's impact on transit ridership in the last few months have looked like, what it means for transit agencies and their communities, and last but not least, how on-demand microtransit can help cities tackle this pandemic. Since the outbreak of COVID-19, fixed route ridership has plummeted. We used openly available data published by Transit App as a proxy for ridership data that transit agencies have confirmed. It shows rapid decline in US, Canada, Australia, and France over the last 3 weeks, and we can simply assume that the rest of the world looks very, very similar. On average, as you see on this graph, we're seeing a 70 to 80% drop, mainly due to voluntary and mandatory social distancing. Now, let's take a look at some of the data, specifically from the US and France, since these reasons are slightly different in each country. As you can see here in France, the biggest ridership loss in cities have been in cities with the highest infection rates. For example, the drop in ridership has been most drastic in Strasbourg because its COVID-19 outbreak has initially the most severe in France. On the other side of the world, in the US, you're seeing a very interesting pattern emerging, where cities on the West Coast have seen much more ridership loss versus the East Coast. Cities that have seen the smallest losses in ridership are also the cities where workers have no other options than to ride public transit. In the US cities with the highest transit dependent lose the least amount of ridership. We assume that cities with more low income, low education, and non-white population have more transit dependencies. And the fact of the matter is, the more transit dependent the population, the less it has stopped riding transit. These findings raise a very important issue around equality. People whose job don't allow them to work remotely or simply cannot afford to drive or take a taxi, they have no other option than to ride transit. These low-skilled, low-income people are being put at a great risk of infection. However, in places where ridership has dropped significantly, there are three major impacts. Transit operators are losing an insane amount of revenue. Critical personnel can't get to work, and certain citizens, such as seniors and people with disabilities, may not be able to access key services. So, why not rethink how your community moves? The COVID-19 crisis could provide a blank slate for transit agencies to redesign the networks from the ground up, because riders will change their habits. For example, many workers will discover that working from home is actually pretty doable, and new travel patterns will develop. So, let's see this as a huge opportunity to innovate in the public transit sector. Let's take Amsterdam and the oil crisis of 1970s as an example, because it's truly a silver lining. The city used the price shock of the oil crisis as an opportunity to build out a world-class bicycle and public transit network. As you can see here on these pictures, you can see on the left-hand side, you can see Amsterdam in the 1970s, while on the right-hand side, you can see Amsterdam in the 2010s. It's a pretty stark difference. Now, on-demand transit helps transportation systems respond to these shocks, but let's take a look at what options we have. Today, public transit networks are organized in a spectrum seen in this picture. On one hand side, they're 100% fixed route, and on the other hand side, they're 100% microtransit. In the middle, we're seeing mixed systems that blend the best of both of these two worlds. Having some elements of on-demand microtransit tends to make the transportation system just more resilient. because if one part of the network goes down, other vehicles can pick up the slack whenever they're needed. The flexibility of on-demand transit helps the entire network better dealing with the shocks, and it also allows to limit the number of people who use a specific vehicle at any given time. So, in conclusion, it could be a perfect solution for COVID-19. Networks that include on-demand transit will recover quicker than purely fixed route based networks. But first, all over the world, we've seen the similar pattern across larger and smaller cities. There's the first phase, the outbreak phase, where you're seeing a drastic drop in ridership in the first 2 weeks. Then you have the phase that we call the crisis phase, where ridership remains low for 2 to 3 months, while people shelter in place and do other types of social distancing. And then you have the big unknown, the recovery phase, where we're starting to see evidence of this being extremely long, like we're seeing in China, where actually most transit agencies are struggling to ramp up compared to what you're seeing in, for example, car travel. The incremental reintroduction of services and social structures, riders hesitant to ride transit, and behaviors that have been changed are all key reasons why we might see this as a slow recovery. Thanks to the resilience and flexibility of on-demand transit that we've discussed in these previous slides, we believe that transit agencies that choose to blend microtransit with their fixed route networks will see a quicker recovery over time. Now, let's look at some ways to transform how your community moves, because the time is really now to act. Let's connect your community through inclusive and efficient on-demand microtransit. On-demand networks help cities tackle this pandemic. And pandemic-ready network involves running the most strategically placed fixed routes and complementing them with on-demand transit where that makes sense. The benefit of microtransit is, by its nature, it has 3 built-in safety measures that are very useful in this pandemic we're seeing right now. On the first side, you're seeing contact tracing, where you can actually trace who has been in contact with whom in the vehicle far more easily than traditional fixed route transit. And then you're seeing the segmentation of rider groups, where it's actually possible to screen riders to ensure vulnerable riders, such as seniors, do not ride with other groups that may not be aware of the potential infections. And then thirdly, just the inherent fact that disinfection in smaller vehicles could just be faster and can happen several times a day. Spare's technology can help you plan, launch, and run on-demand microtransit. In a nutshell, Spare Platform is a cloud-based software as a service platform that really guides operators through the new world of on-demand mobility, facilitating the transition to safe and sustainable mobility. And we can be ready to launch in just 24 to 48 hours, as I'll explain in some of the upcoming case studies. In a crisis, transit without Spare looks like this. On one hand, operations are manually planned and slow-moving. Rider safety is really hard to measure. Networks are rigid and vulnerable, and crisis response is uncoordinated. However, with Spare in a crisis, transit is rapidly implemented and adapted. Safety measures are data-driven. It is flexible and on-demand. And finally, it's seamlessly scalable. Now, let's look at some of the ways that we're helping across the globe. New and existing partners are making the move with Spare. Let's take a look at Denton County. Now, Denton County has been a customer of Spare for quite some time. In this COVID-19 crisis, they complemented reduced fixed route with on-demand for transporting essential workers, consisting of, on one hand, an expansion of the existing microtransit service into Denton, and launching new zones in Louisville. Here we're also enabling Denton County to do better contact tracing using Spare's technology. Another example is a new partner, Palma in Spain, that just launched this past Saturday. They launched a completely new on-demand microtransit service for essential workers, and from start to launch, we were up and ready in 48 hours, including translation of training material and apps. And this is also a fantastic use case of using taxis as overflow, using our newest technology, Spare Fleets. In Lincoln, Nebraska, we're seeing an accelerated and adapted service that was already actually planned with us for a few months. While Lincoln was already planning to launch a new paratransit service with Spare's technology, they decided to accelerate the launch with an on-demand microtransit service to complement the reduced fixed route service. Thanks for following this micro webinar. If you're curious on how we can help you, please feel free to reach out to me on k@sparelabs.com. I'm looking forward to seeing you in an upcoming webinar.